Hi and welcome yet again to the channel Newtown Naughty Boy, and in this particular video I'm going to be looking at the Fine Work Barrel 65 pistol, the FWB 65, and I'm going to attempt to strip this pistol down, to inspect it and to clean it out and re-grease it. I feel that I have some issues with the pistol at the moment. I don't think it's shooting very well, so I'm kind of forced into this situation where I think I've got to bite the bullet and strip it down and see if I can get the mechanism to work properly. So just a little bit of a background on this particular type of pistol. It's a recoilless pistol made in Germany, and it was used predominantly in the 1970s, I believe, maybe even later than that, as a target pistol. It was generally used at the Olympics and other competitions, but obviously in subsequent years the PCP type pistols have overtaken this type of spring operated air pistol. The way that it works is that it has a traditional piston and spring in here that forces air in this direction, obviously towards the pellet that is loaded into a breech here, and then obviously is fired out of the barrel. But the unique operation of this pistol denotes that whilst the piston is travelling in this direction to force the pellet out, the carriage here, or what's sometimes called the sledge, is pushed back at the same time. So there's a motion in this direction backwards as the pellet or the piston is travelling in this direction. The result of that is hopefully that you get no recoil, or hardly any recoil at all. However, the action, as you might imagine, is prone to some issues, especially the operation of the sledge and its movement in the rear direction as you shoot. I feel that this air pistol is not operating correctly, and therefore I'm kind of forced into taking this apart and having a look. Whilst I do that, it's a good idea to video, of course, and then I've got some sort of history as to how I've taken the air pistol apart, and obviously hopefully it's going to help other people do the same. Now, I understand from other videos that are on YouTube for this particular pistol, I will put some links, or a link in my description, to a gentleman in Germany who has done several YouTube videos on this particular type of pistol, both for stripping and reassembly. The name, I'm going to get it wrong probably, Nebelbrett, and I'll obviously put that on the video in some respect so that you can actually see this gentleman's videos as well, because I think if you're going to actually perform the same operation, it's probably worth looking at both sets of videos, and I hope that they complement each other and help. So the gentleman in Germany states in his videos that to work on this pistol, bit of trepidation probably, it's not for the faint-hearted. As you can imagine, because of the complexities of the workings inside the pistol with its anti-recoil devices and operation, it's going to be a little bit more complicated than a normal spring pistol. So This is going to involve obviously some detailed video, and I will be taking photographs along the way to help me and to help you hopefully when you come to do it. But it's important that you take each step very carefully and you note down as you take things apart where things go, and photographs can help with that when you come to assemble the pistol back. And I'll be using my usual technique of each time I take a part out of the pistol, I will lay it on a wooden board with a number so that I know the exact sequence of events for how I took the pistol apart, and then that will aid me when I put the pistol back together again. So before I'm doing the work, obviously I've tested the pistol out. I just wanted to understand how much velocity, or at least foot poundage, this pistol was putting out. It's doing about 3 foot-pounds. That equated to about 404 feet per second, and that's probably pretty good for a pistol like this. But as I said earlier, I've got some issues with the anti-recoil device. I think it needs cleaning out and re-greasing, etc. As you can see, I've already taken the grips off, the wooden grips. I usually do this anyway, but I think they've got to come off. Well, they have got to come off anyway. So I've taken them off. It's always best to take the grips off any pistol when you're working, so that you don't crack them or score them in any way. It's just best to take them off. So, but in this particular instance, they've got to come off anyway. So it's just 2 screws, and you're left with the frame of the pistol. So let's move on to the next stage then and start to dismantle this pistol. The first stage is to separate the frame, the trigger part frame, from the upper body, the actual sledge part and the workings of the air pistol. So to do that, there are 2 Allen type screws here to remove, and 2 Phillips type head screws to remove here. So I'm going to remove the 4 of these and separate the body. And just as an aside, to actually ensure that you can actually undo these hex bolts here, you need to have a shortened Allen key or Allen wrench to do that, because otherwise you can't get anything in there to actually unscrew these. So it may be that you have to chop one of these down to actually enable yourself to do that. So let me do that, and I'll come back to you with the next stage. So I've taken those 4 bolts out, or screws out. The ones at the back, the Allen bolts, they are the same height or same length. They each have a spring washer on them, but it's these 2 at the front that you need to take special note of. The one at the front is a shorter screw than the one at the back, so don't get those mixed up when you start to put it back together again. The smaller one goes in the front. So with those removed, you can then lift off the trigger part action from the sledge, and in here of course is the trigger part of the pistol. The rest of it is here, detailed. Quite a complex arrangement of springs and all sorts in here. A lot of pins along here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that I can see, that have circlips either side, so they're going to have to probably come off for what we're going to do. one of the sledge actions is here. You can see that moving backwards and forwards on 2 rods. So the body that we've just taken off, the trigger part of the air pistol, was fixed to that, and that's a moving part. The other part of the sledge action is actually on this here. This moves as well. So it's probably a good idea to take a few photographs of this in this state before you start dismantling anything else. So I'll do that now, and we'll move on to the next part of the disassembly. On Neville Brett's video, he takes apart the trigger on this stage. On the next stage, it's actually 2 screws in here, one there and one there, to remove the trigger action out complete. I'm not going to do that. I don't think I need to do that, but if you feel you need to, then that's how you get that part out. But as I say, I'm going to leave that for now. So that aside, the next stage is to remove the cocking lever action. So it's a small pin here that needs to be pushed out at this end. So I'm going to do that now. It's just there. I'm going to do that and come back to you and show you the parts that come out. Actually, it's not that pin there. I've just seen it's this screw here, so that's going to make it easier. Just unscrew this screw here and let's see what happens. So we're going to take that out now. Not much of an issue there. As I said, I just removed the screw. There it is there. I'm going to screw it back into the cocking lever here, just so that I don't lose it. So that's easy enough. Or at least actually leave it in there like that. So with that removed, I can start to see some horrible grease oozing out of where I took the cocking lever out. So there's certainly some stuff that will need to be cleaned out. So let's move on to the next stage then. Just as an aside, before we go any further, I did print off the exploded diagram of the FWB 65 before I started, and these are readily available on the internet, so they should be easy to pick up. I've kind of done a similar thing to our friend in Germany here. The last part we took out, I've circled with a number 1, so that was the cocking lever, and now we're going to move along to these parts here that removes the front part of the sledge. So I'll follow that through as best I can as we take parts out of this air pistol. So we're now going to take a part out of this assembly here, the actual sledge, or the forward part of the sledge system. There are 4 circlips to take out. There's one here, one here. If I push this back, then just in there, 3 and 4. So these circlips have to come out first before, if we can get that in focus for you, these pins here will come out. So I'm going to obviously do that off camera first and then come back to you. Probably going to be a bit fiddly this one. So I have the 4 circlips out. I used a tool like this, a little pick. I've got several of these, different sizes, etc. And I managed to pull these out with this needle pick. I did have one fly out, so you've really got to be careful when you pull these out that you don't lose them. I'm not sure what I would have done if one had gone flying across the garage and I'd lost it, but I've got all 4 out, and now you can see that I can pull these 2 pins out here that hold the sledge, the front sledge in. So I'm just going to do that and then I'll come back to you. So here we are with the front sledge out and the 2 pins drawn. Something to note here, obviously with these pins taken out, they aren't the same both ends, so I've got them orientated here how I took them out. So the shorter end where the circlip slips in there goes in towards the back of the gun, and the longer part here to where the groove is for the front circlip now obviously is positioned at that end. So you need to note that so that you don't struggle when you come to put the gun back together again, that you get these round the wrong way. These came out quite easily. The guy on the other video, the gentleman in Germany, had difficulty with these. They were really gummed up, and he had difficulty, but with some gentle persuasion with some long nose pliers this should come out. I can't see any difference with the sledge here, but I'm going to mark it in some way so that I know that it goes in that way. There may be a subtle difference there, so I'm going to mark it in some way so that I know which way it goes back in. So operation 3 that we're doing, as I've marked on here, is to remove the rear sledge assembly. So we've got another pin here that's probably going to be similar to the one we took out at the front, and a couple of circlips to remove. So if we look at the assembly itself, I'm just trying to keep this in focus for you. The circlip, and there seems to be a washer at this end. If that stays in focus for us, I'm going to remove that, and there seems to be just inside here another circlip, possibly a washer with that as well. So I'll take those out now, and then I'll come back to you with the results of that. Okay, so that took me a little bit of time to do. It was a little bit fiddly more than anything else. This pin, again, it has a shorter part here at the front where the circlip fits in, and nearer to the body of the gun there's a longer expanse of metal before the circlip groove there. So just making sure that when you actually take this out, that you understand the way that this pin goes in. At the back end there's a circlip, but there's a washer behind it, and at the forward end, the end towards the body of the air pistol, there were 2 washers and then the circlip. And this assembly, the sledge assembly, obviously rides in the middle there. So that's in the middle on that pin, and the assembly fits onto through this hole here, and sits like that in there with the pin through it, and then you've got these various circlips either end to hold it in. It's not too difficult, but it's very fiddly, and small fingers are probably the best way to get these out, and making sure that you don't lose the circlips as well. Okay, so with that out, I'll mark that up and put it on my board, and then we'll move on to the next bit. Just before we move on, I've just noticed that when I've started to move these washers around. That there are in fact two sets of washers at each end and a circlip as well. And so just to let you know that I found another washer in there that was stuck to the other one. So the next part to take out is the rear sight. I understand it's just a circlip here to remove, probably a washer behind it, and then you unwind the windage screw here to then take the whole assembly out. So this is shown up on our diagram number 4 here, those components to come out. I think this is probably an easier one to do, so I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll come back with the evidence of what's happened. Quite simple, that one. So as I said, the windage adjustment was unscrewed once the circlip and its washer was removed, so that was an easy one to do. What's left from that is, I'm not sure if you can see that, but inside there, let's come out a little bit, maybe that'll come into focus then. There is a spring there, so when I took the sight off it was spring loaded. Just got to be aware of that, but I don't think it'll be too much trouble for you. So with that off, let's move on to the next step. And before we move on to the next stage, I've just discovered something else after watching the gentleman in Germany's video. There is a ball bearing and a spring from where I took the back sight off. So very carefully take the ball out or ball off, and then lift a very small spring. So don't lose those, they're obviously very important. So let's now move on to the next stage. The next part to remove is the mainspring. So now we've uncovered the rear sight, we've got access to this Allen bolt in here. I found it a bit stiff. Obviously it's doing quite an important job here, so you just need to give it maybe a bit of lubrication, but it's holding this spring in as well, so just undo that first. Be very careful about how you take that out. So that's the bolt and the spring at the back. Obviously the spring, when you put it back, the spring part of this spring still has got to be poking backwards. No, it doesn't actually hold the mainspring in. That's the next operation. So put these parts aside and then we'll undo the screw that enables us to take the mainspring out. So on top of the air pistol there's a screw here, a slotted screw to unscrew, and that will retain this back assembly on, and once that is unscrewed and pulled out, then obviously this assembly is going to be pushed out by the mainspring. So therefore be very careful, and I suggest that you hold the gun down and under pressure whilst you take this screw out here. So I'm going to do that off camera and then come back to you and show you what the spring's like inside. Okay, so I've removed the spring. As you can see, there's the assembly that fitted in there like that, and that was the screw that was holding that all together. You can probably see now that it was actually under quite a bit of tension, so that's going to take a bit of work to actually get that back in when we come to assemble the gun. So I'm sure that'll be a bit of a trial, but we'll get round it somehow. So I've taken this out, as you can see. The spring, okay, a little bit bent, but I think that's still okay to use. it seems to be, there's no breakages there or anything like that, so I'm going to use that again. So now we'll move on to the next part. So just to show you on the diagram before we move on, actually this is what we've just taken out, the mainspring and this part that's at the back with its leaf spring at the back of it. So okay, so with that out the way, let's move on. What I have been able to do at this particular stage is actually take the piston out from the rest of the action. It just came out of the back. It has a metal seal on the end, on the piston end, so and some sort of neoprene buffer at the end. The ring here is a bit like a car piston ring, in as far as you can pinch it in and actually close it up, and obviously once it's inside it expands to actually make the seal. So I just thought I'd show you that part before we start to dismantle these parts on the top here. So I'm going to put this away on my board and then we'll move on. So I'd say this is probably the most difficult part of the exercise here, to dismantle all of this along here. Now as you've just seen, I've taken the mainspring out and I've taken the piston out. Now really that's probably all I wanted to do, was to clean up the insides where the piston runs, and obviously where the spring is as well, where that runs through, to clean that and re-grease all of that. Now I could probably stop at this point and not dismantle any of this complicated, very complicated pieces of metal in here, held in with pins, etc. However, because I've now taken the piston out, I can't get it back in without removing the slide inside. There's a kind of like a slide inside that the piston runs inside of. It's actually locked now and won't come out because it's held in by something below that operates the obviously the firing cycle. So rather than take all of this apart, I'm going to take the first two pins out and remove the parts here and see if I can actually get access to whatever it is that's stopping this. You can probably hear it knocking inside as I run it backwards and forwards, this sleeve inside. So I'm hoping to do that, and then I'll come back to you with the results of that. So I've taken the first two pins out and just giving you a view of what it looks like down there. I haven't taken completely everything out. There's a spring here and a slide which I haven't removed yet, which would come out. But I wanted to show you the bits that have come out so far. So as I say, two pins held in by these circlips. This is the important part to show you. This is the power adjuster for the trigger. It came out from the second hole in here. It kind of was slightly under some tension, some spring tension. The important thing to note is this part on the end, which I'm not sure if you can see. It's not pointed, but it is a kind of like a spring-loaded affair, like a piston, and it's got like a pencil point to it. Well, no, not a pencil point, but like a screwdriver point to it, and that fits into a notch in this mechanism there. It sits like that. Okay, so I'm just showing you for when you reassemble where that bit goes, and it's, as I say, it was sprung loaded, so it was under tension when I took the pin out. So I'm going to stop there for a moment and have a look and see what I can do next. So what I've done now is I've actually put this part back. Sometimes it's a good idea to actually reverse what you've just done so that you can understand at the time where the part actually fits in and what actually happens. As I said, I thought there were things under pressure here, and certainly this kind of cage affair that this part sits in is under tension, and you have to, so that all the holes line up for this pin here where the circlip goes through, you have to ensure that everything is like tensioned before you can put the pin through, and making sure that this, as I say, this kind of flathead screwdriver part here fits into this notch here. So I've kind of put it back together, but I'm going to take it apart again now. But now I understand how this part works, so I can move on. So I'm just going to take this component apart again whilst the video is running, and just for the purposes of clarity really, just as an aside, that's the spelling of the gentleman in Germany who also has some videos on this subject, and I'd recommend that you watch his as well. So that's his name there, Nebelbrett. So I'm just going to take this pin out at the front here. I'm hoping that that's all in focus for you. So that pin comes out after you've taken the clip off the back. This spring here can come off there. Then we should be able to take the second pin in out. As I said, it's kind of under pressure there, and we'll take this part out. This is got this spring in here and various bits and pieces, so take that off, and we can take this guide out as well, or can we? Yes, we can. Thus, okay, so that was what I was doing before, and as I said to you, I've put it back in and taken it out a few times just to make myself very clear about how that goes in. So let's move on now to the next bit. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the third pin. I've already taken the clip off on one side, so just removing the pin here, and we have one piece that's going to come out, this shaped piece. If you remember, this part's locked into it, so that's come out with that pin removed. It was sitting, I'm not sure if you can see, but it was sitting in between the jaws of this part here that's still retained by this next clip. So we're now going to move along to the fourth clip. So I'm hoping you can see this now. I've taken the clip off the fourth pin, and there's a part in here, and it's kind of resting underneath the mechanism. I think it's part of the sear and trigger. It's resting underneath the parts that are held in by the fifth and probably the sixth pin. So even though I take this pin out here, I'm hoping you can see that and it's in focus. this part now can slide around at the back, at the bottom there, but I can't take it out yet. This other part here is actually in the way and is trapping it. So I would guess when we put this back together, this part's kind of got to go in first in some respects. So I'm going to put that away, and then we'll move on to the next stage. Okay, so now I'm going to take the 5th pin out. So I've taken the clip off and now removing it, or attempting to remove it. I suspect, well, I know that there's a spring there, so I suspect it's under pressure, and I'll do this off camera and come back. So I've just discovered that prior to removing pin 5, which is holding a spring, pin 6 has got to come out at the same time, I think, and I've discovered by pulling this assembly up here that I've got more access to this spring that's connected to pin 6, but although it's actually linked in to this assembly here at the top, when this is pushed down, the spring seems to be caught around the clasp of the spring that comes from pin 5. I'm not sure whether that's actually by design or that's just happened, but I'm going to have to look into that, because that could be an issue. But I'm going to have to take the 6th pin out and take the whole assembly out now. So okay, I've got all of the pins out now, and that was tricky, and I'm hoping that I've got enough information here to actually enable me to put this back together, which will be another video, I think. So I've got all the component parts out here, and this spring here, as I say, it's kind of, the two springs are actually joined together or linked. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't see that on the video from the guy in Germany. But if you look at his videos for assembly, then he goes into great detail about how all these bits are fit together, and so I think that's worth you looking at that. I'm going to do another video when I do the reassembly, but obviously before I put everything back, I'm going to start to clean the bits up. I may even need to get some spare parts. I've noticed in this part here, the actual kind of this cylinder that's now come out, that the piston slides down, that the seal that goes in there, the seal that the receiver for the barrel fits into when it's closed up, that's definitely falling apart. So I'm going to try and get the part for that as well. So yes, quite a job. Just a last minute note before we leave this video, just some things I thought about really. I've referred to these clips all along that I've taken out from the spindles as circlips. I don't think they are called circlips, and in actual fact the guy in Germany calls these Jesus clips. I think in this country, in the UK, we call them E-clips. Doesn't matter very much, but they certainly don't, I don't think they are circlips. So that's just a point to note. I have had a look at the video from Nebelbrett, in Germany, and these two springs that were joined together on my pistol were separated on his, so I have separated these up. I have looked at his video as well of reassembly for the trigger mechanism. You can actually see here that I've actually joined some parts together, and so I think I'm confident in actually putting all this back together. It's just a matter of making sure you know which bits fit where, and with his help, with his video, it's quite easy to understand where these bits go, and the process that he employs to actually make sure all of this fits together, whilst then you put the assembled parts back into the main body. So I will go through this during the reassembly. So I think we've got the confidence to do this, but the part 2 is likely to follow in a few weeks' time, I think, because as I said, I think I might try to get some spare parts for this before we start the reassembly, but also in the meantime I'm going to clean all these parts up. So that's it for now. So join me again on the next part, which will be the reassembly. Thank you for watching.